Hello Allemaal. Hi everybody. Welcome back to my channel, Mona Cottage Books. I'm Selby, and today I want to talk to you about children's books. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you the age ranges roughly for different types of children's books, and I've got a whole bunch of nice examples here so that you can get an idea. If you go into a bookstore or a library, you can start to think, oh, my kid is 6, so this might be something that would work well for them, rather than like, oh, you just pick up a random book and it's like for a 15-year-old. So hopefully this gives you a little bit more information about the different types of books, the different reading levels and being read to levels. Now I'm coming from North America, from the United States, so the terminology that I use is from there. If you are from another part of the world that speaks English, and you have different terms for these age groups and these types of books, then leave them in the comments so that we can all learn a little bit and I can put those into my knowledge base when I'm speaking with people. That'd be super helpful for me too. So first off, we're going to do board books. So board books are books made out of boards, basically. So it's basically talking about how the pages are thicker. They're like boards. And so that is for the little hands that can't rip them, whereas they can with regular pages of a book. So these are designed for ages, 6 months to 2 to 3 years. Now, can you give a book to a baby that's under 6 months? Yes, but babies under 6 months are basically like sacks of potatoes and they don't do much, so it's really not going to do them any good. But once kids get to about 6 months old, they can start to sit up and look at things, and they might be able to open the flap, and they might be able to pet this fuzzy sheep. This happens to be The Little Prince in French, and it's got these fun different textures. So the board books for younger kids, like 6 months to a year, a lot of them have textures or flaps and fun things like that. And then sometimes you find board books like this. They're just gigantic. And so that's also kind of fun, but you probably have this with like an older kid. Obviously, I don't know, if you drop this on a baby, it's pretty hefty. So this might even be for like a 3-year-old. So board books, I would say 0, but not, more like 6 months to 3. So it's like you're leaving the book with the kid. A board book is going to last longer. They do end up chewing on the edges and stuff, but that just happens. So board books are kind of that sacrificial first level where they're like, okay, you're gonna make this into a mess. Here you go, kiddo. And now they've got all sorts of different board books. So this is On the Night You Were Born. This actually started out as a picture book, but then they're making them into board books. And I think my brother got my daughter Physics for Babies in a board book form, and Relativity for Babies. And so they have so many different things. They've got like all of the classics, Jane Austen, but in a board book form. So you'll be able to find something. There's fiction, nonfiction. There's ones with just one word. There's ones with a whole bunch of text. So there's always something that you can read in a board book. So that's board books. 0, more like 6 months to maybe 3 years, depending on how comfortable you feel with your kid, and then going on to the next level, which is picture books. All right, now we're on to picture books. And picture books are what you think of when you think of kids' books. They're usually a bigger format like this. They've got lots of pictures inside. And yeah, I mean, that's a picture book, right? So something to know about picture books is picture books are designed, written, created to be read by an adult to a child. So although you think, okay, this book is for a kid, it's not something that most children are going to be able to read. Case in point, something like this one has incendiary in it. So picture books can be a great way for kids to learn new vocabulary, but having them read them is generally too difficult. So picture books, you can probably start, you can start reading to kids when they're about 1, from picture books, up until I would say 7 or 8, depending on the kid and maybe if you're reading with younger siblings or something. But most kids are probably going to be less interested in picture books once they get into the 6, 7 range. But there are so many different kinds of picture books. There's ones like this one, there's counting books. This one happens to have these fold outs. So you'll find these in books sometimes. Cool fold outs. So that's nice. That keeps kids interested. And then another example, so this little one, you'd think, oh, that's a nice little book. That should be for a kid to read. But if you open it up and you look at this text, this is small text. It's a lot of it. The words are difficult. This is not for a kid to read. This is for an adult to read to a child. So this is really good for like traveling and stuff. But it's not like something you would give to a kid as their first book to read. So those are picture books. Again, ages probably 1 to 6 or so. After picture books, or while the child is still enjoying picture books. So you can enjoy these types of books, you know, they can overlap. It's not just like, oh, now you're done with picture books, we move on to this, you never see another picture book. The next section is early readers or emergent readers. That's what we call books that kids are just learning how to read. And here's a good example. This one happens to be in Dutch, but this is one of the books that my daughter brought home from school. And you can see there's literally just like 3 words on each page. So it's super easy. You can find ones with just 1 word on each page to help kids read. Then they get a few more sentences. Let's see, I think this one, yeah. So then you go up to, oh, this also got 3 words on a page, but then you've got full sentences. So this is an early reader or emergent reader. And then they kind of go up a little bit more. So you've got, this is an Elephant and Piggy. Again, they've got a sentence or 2 on each page. And then this is an old Dutch book I found for my daughter. Then you've got, you know, a couple lines of text, but it's still pretty simple. The word choice is easier. You probably can't tell in Dutch, but you know, it's, I lifted both of them onto my trunk instead of like I hoisted or something like that. So they're using simpler words so the kids can practice their reading. A lot of them, you'll find ones that maybe use phonetics. And so it's like goose on the loose. And there's all these things that end with oos, and a moose probably comes, I'm assuming. Or a fat cat on a mat. So there's a fat cat on a mat that doesn't like rats, whatever, to kind of give kids that repetition. So that's once kids start reading. So anywhere between 4 if they're really precocious and they're really interested in it, but probably 5, 6, 7, somewhere around that range is what you're going to be looking for. If your kid is starting to read, you want early readers or emergent readers. After the emergent readers or early readers, then you would go into early chapter books. And Charlie and Mouse is a good example of an early chapter book. It is a little bit thicker than some of the other for the early readers. And it's got broken into, this one's broken into like stories, but they can also break it into chapters. If you've ever read Frog and Toad, that's an early chapter book. So the kind of short little stories within there where something happens. And so then kids kind of get the idea of, oh, this, I can read just this section and then, you know, put in a bookmark and then come back to it because it's the chapter or it's kind of ended a thought a little bit. And so this one is individual little stories. So that's handy. So the kid is like, oh, I don't have to read the whole thing all at once. I can read parts of it and then come back to it. And then that's also, these are also early chapter books. They might be bordering on what I would call lower middle grade. So again, they're not that thick. This one has a bit more text on the page. It's probably the next thing up, but it does have chapters or different sections. So you don't have to read the whole thing at once to have it make sense. You can then move on. And so that's nice. And so then, you know, you kids get a bookmark and they can be like, oh, I'm reading this book, and you read it over a couple days and they get into that feeling of like, okay, I don't have to read it all at once like you would with a picture book. Also, another example of that is this is Kitty and the Midnight Rescue. Also, these early chapter books, early readers, emergent readers, and lower middle grade chapter books, they tend to have a good amount of illustration. So this is still where you want to keep your kids' imagination entertained. They're still visual a lot of the time. They might not be able to read something and kind of understand what's going on, so having pictures is helpful for them. So this is kind of like what I'd call a lower middle grade. So it's a little bit more advanced because it does have more text. It might, fill the whole page, but it is in chapters. And so that's kind of, this one's kind of a little bit on the border. You can also read these to younger kids. So if a kid is reading it themselves, that would be anywhere from 6 to 8 or 9, depending on their reading level, of course, and their interest. But you can read these. I started reading Kitty to my daughter when she was 5, because it's got a lot of pictures. We could read a chapter a night. So you can do what's called reading ahead. You as the adult, you are capable of reading these things. So you can read books that are more advanced to your child, and they can sit and listen and get exposed to the new vocabulary and things like that, and new concepts without having to read it themselves. Now, something like this is great because, I read these to my daughter now who's 6, but in like a year, I keep these around and she will be reading them herself. So these kind of get double bill on my book, that they're super useful. Okay, so that. Next up in our tour of books is middle grade fiction. Now, middle grade refers to, in the United States, middle school, and that is ages like 10, 11, 12, I think. But it actually, in the reading world, that encompasses more. It's like the end of elementary school and kind of the very beginning, even maybe, of high school. So I would say middle grade, anywhere from like 8 to 12, 13, depending on what the kids like to read. And so then within that, there's this wide variety of books. So you might find something like this. This is Flat Stanley, and you can see that it's quite a bit thicker. There's full text on the page, but there's also a fair few pictures. So this is going to be kind of a little bit lower. So maybe a kid who's like 9, 10 might enjoy something like this. Whereas your maybe 10, 12-year-olds might want something more adventurous, like The Famous 5. There's still a few illustrations in here, but not that many. You're starting to phase those out. And then your 12, 13, maybe up into 14 year olds are going to be, they don't have pictures anymore. And this one's based off of Star Wars. So kind of more advanced concepts and readings. Now you can get absolutely everything in middle grade fiction. Middle grade fiction is amazing. There's realistic fiction, there's magic realism, there's fantasy, there's historical fiction, there's future, there's, everything that you've got in adult books you can find in middle grade. There's middle grade horror, there's also, Goosebumps and things like that. So if your kids are at that age, somewhere between, say, 8 on the low end and 12 or 13 on the higher end, then you can find something that they will be interested in. Also to note, kids like to, and I think I mentioned this in the last section, they like to read up. So they like to read about protagonists, people that are older than them by a couple of years. So if your kid is 8, they probably want to read about kids that are 9, 10, 11, because it kind of gives them an idea of what's going to come when they're a little bit older. If they're in elementary school, they might want to read about middle schoolers so that they kind of get an idea of what it's like. If they're, 10 or 12, they're going to want to read up to like 14 and 15-year-olds. What's that like? What's relationships and friendships like at that point? That kind of thing. So that's something to look for when you look at the age. Your 12-year-old probably doesn't want to read about what an 8-year-old is doing. They're like, I've done that. I want to go ahead. So that's something to keep in mind when you're reading the in that middle grade. And there's so much middle grade, and it's so awesome. You can find something, I'm sure. Next up is YA, and YA stands for young adult. And so YA is for ages probably 15, maybe 14 on the low end, 15 to 18 or 19. But you know, I know a lot of adults that read YA because they're very adventurous and fun. So like this is a sci-fi fantasy kind of thing set in the future, and then you've got all sorts of like YA fantasy is really big, but you will find YA historical fiction and YA every genre you could possibly want also comes in a YA. But again, those are for ages about 12 to 15 up until like about 20. But again, so kids again like to read up. So if you've got a 15-year-old, then they're going to want to be reading about a 17-year-old. If you've got a 17-year-old, they're going to probably want to read about a 18, 19-year-old. Yeah, so again, there's lots of different options in the young adult. There's also a new adult format coming out, and that's usually like 20 to 25. And a lot of those books are like going off to college, getting your first job, having your first real romance, that kind of stuff. And so if you've got kids like later teens in the 17, 18 range, they're probably going to be looking at those types of books. Another option is graphic novels. Now, graphic novels in the last decade or two have just exploded. They're not just comics anymore. They are actually a great way to get kids interested in reading if they find like a whole page of text as really intimidating, but they're still getting older and they want, you know, more nuanced stories. This is less intimidating to have, you know, a small amount of text and these pictures, but they're still reading. I mean, there's still quite a bit of text in here. It's just in a slightly different format and looks less intimidating. So this is the only graphic novel that I have right now because they always sell out. Kids love them. There's graphic novels for the, you know, the early readers. There's graphic novels for early chapter books. This is kind of a middle grade one called The Loser Squad, and I think they're at summer camp. And there's one called Lumberjanes, El Defo. There's a lot of really good middle grade ones that explore coming of age stories and things like that. And so they're really great for kids that maybe don't want to sit down with a huge thick volume. Maybe it's hard for them to imagine what's going on. And so graphic novels are a really good option for that. And they're always coming out with more now. So this is a really good option. And don't be like, oh, it's a comic book. It's not real reading. It's real reading. I mean, there's reading in here. So like, give kids what they want, and they will be more likely to then later on branch out into something else. Because now is the time to get them hooked on reading, get them loving reading. And if it seems like a big chore and it's difficult, then they won't want to do it. But if it's this fun thing, it'll be so much easier to get them into reading. Okay, the last form of kids' books that I want to talk about is nonfiction. So all of the age ranges that I've talked about before have a corresponding nonfiction element. I don't have any nonfiction picture books right now or nonfiction board books right now, but there's tons of them. That, you know, the nonfiction board books are like these are the colors. This is a cat. This is a dog. Then the nonfiction picture books. Oh, there's tons about you know, saving the earth, or what kind of dog is this. There's so many, and there's really great ones coming out. I had one that was the inside of a flower. Very cool. This is a kind of an early reader nonfiction. So it's got simple text and a picture. And my daughter, she's 6, she read this one and she thought it was really nice. You know, she learned a little bit about the forest, and practiced her reading at the same time. Then you've got, you know, a little bit every age range, there's something for everyone. So if your kid is an early reader and they love Egyptian mummies, there are early readers about Egyptian mummies. So you can always find something that your kid will be interested in. This one happens to be a polar one. These are so awesome. The kids can read as much or as little as they want from something like this. Then you can come in and read a little bit more. Kids can ask questions, you know, so like, even though once my daughter was 4, I started buying books like this because I can read them to her, but now she's getting older, she can start to read them to herself, ask questions. Some of them have like interactive things you can get digitally, which is fun if they're, you know, really interested in the polar region, you know, get them some more information. Then you can get something, this is kind of like more of a middle grade, almost a high school one. It's about the planet, the ecosystems. So it has a lot more text. It's smaller text, but it's still illustrated and it's still teaching your kids really great information in almost like a comic book kind of way. So this is what I love that they're coming out with now, is books like this that, you know, teach kids things, but also engages them and makes it really interesting, and it's beautiful and fun. And me as a nonfiction nerd child would have just loved this book and anything like this. So again, it doesn't have to be just all fantasy books about bears and mice and stuff. You can have a lot of really great nonfiction as well for all age ranges. Once you get up to what would be considered YA age, like 15 and over, they're pretty much just like, you can read an adult nonfiction book. We don't need to make like YA specific nonfiction for you. You are old enough now, you can just read that as you want. So I hope that that has given you an idea of what to look for, the age ranges, the wording that's being used for books when you're looking for reading to your child or having your child learn to read, now that is helpful.